in the quiet community of Fairfield, Indiana. A creative young woman with dreams of Colorado and a future in art found herself at the center of a mystery that would take years to unravel. This is the story of Caitlin Markham, told in the gentle cadence of facts and memories as the investigation slowly revealed what happened on a summer night in 2011. Caitlin Markham lived in Fairfield, Indiana, a community of just over 40,000 residents where violent crime was notably rare. At 21 years old, she was described by those who knew her as somewhat eccentric, creative, thoughtful, and an overall sweet person. Her artistic talents had been apparent since childhood, and you could often find her with a paintbrush tucked into her hair, always looking for something new to create. In August of 2011, Caitlin was studying graphic art at the Art Institute of Ohio in Cincinnati. When not attending classes, she worked part-time at a local bridal shop. She and her fiancé, John Carter, had been together for approximately 6 years and engaged for one. John was artistic as well, teaching glass blowing, and together they had been making plans to move to Colorado in the near future. That August represented a time of transition in Caitlin's life. She was days away from turning 22 weeks from graduating and months away from relocating and getting married. Many significant life changes awaited her on the horizon. She maintained a close relationship with her father, Dave, and her younger sister, Allie, who was 15 at the time. Her father would later describe her as positive, outgoing, and motivated. She had a plan, he said, and she was sticking to it. According to him, she was too pragmatic to ever just disappear without explanation. On August 14, 2011, something unexpected occurred. Caitlin stopped responding to messages, and her phone went directly to voicemail when called. Her fiancé, John, went to her home and found her car parked outside, which was unusual since she would normally have been at the bridal shop at that time. When John entered her townhouse, there was no sign of forced entry. Nothing appeared out of place or broken, but Caitlin was nowhere to be found. Her cell phone seemed to be missing as well, and her dog was roaming around unattended, which was concerning. At 8:00 almost p.m. that evening, John called 911. "Hi, my name is John Carter," he said to the dispatcher. "I am calling. I know that you're not supposed to report a missing person before 24 hours, but my fiancée is missing. I can't find her anywhere." He explained that he had last seen Caitlin around midnight the previous night as he was leaving her townhouse. John lived with his mother, just a 5-minute walk away. He mentioned that they had exchanged a few text messages after he left, but a few hours later, Caitlin had stopped responding and hadn't replied to his good morning text either. When police met with John, they noticed scratches on his neck. He initially attributed these marks to his electric razor, but later admitted he wasn't actually certain about their origin, though he insisted it was nothing concerning. John expressed that he was losing sleep over his fiancée's disappearance and simply wanted her home safe. Neither Caitlin's father, Dave, nor her sister, Allie, had any information about where she might have gone. The police began their investigation, and after initial scrutiny, they stated that John was not considered a person of interest at that time, shifting their focus elsewhere. The community mobilized quickly to search for Caitlin. Approximately 100 people gathered in Fairfield to distribute flyers with her photograph and information. They searched wooded areas, streets, and surrounding neighborhoods using various methods, including all-terrain vehicles. "Caitlin is the love of my life," John told reporters during this period, "I've been with her for 6 years. We've been engaged for a year. Today would be exactly a year. Today is also her birthday." Instead of celebrating Caitlin's birthday, family friends and police were searching for the now 22-year-old. Friends described her as a responsible young woman who would never leave without telling anyone, as this behavior was entirely out of character for her. "I kept texting her, no response, no response. I call her no response." John explained to the media, "I'm terrified. I'm absolutely terrified. I just want to find Caitlin and celebrate her birthday with her and go to Red Lobster like she was planning. That's all I want to do." Police reported at this stage that there was no evidence of foul play. They noted that the only things missing from Caitlin's home were herself and her cell phone, which they had not been able to trace. They believed she was last seen wearing a gray shirt, which became another detail for searchers to look for. As the investigation continued, authorities focused on data from Caitlin's phone provider. Text messages had been sent from her phone to John's between 11:04 p.m. and 11:36 p.m. on August 13th. But as John had stated, there was nothing after that time. At 12:06 a.m., her phone had either been turned off, the battery had died, or the SIM card had been removed. This was where the electronic trail went cold. Police interviewed the manager of a GE credit union in Fairfield, who shared that Caitlin had visited the bank 3 weeks before her disappearance on July 20th, 2011. She had been accompanied by John's mother. Caitlin had told the manager she wanted to apply for a credit card with John's mother as a co-signer. During this interaction, the manager recalled John's mother joking, "I'll co-sign for the visa, but you've got to take my son to Colorado with you." The manager then turned to Caitlin and said with a laugh, "I guess you're stuck now." The manager remembered that Caitlin didn't reciprocate the laughter. Instead, she appeared somber and serious. This suggested to the manager that perhaps the credit card may not have been Caitlin's idea. Ultimately, the card was never established. Another individual informed police that he had been with Caitlin and John on the evening of August 13th. The three of them had smoked marijuana and discussed the couple's plans to move to Colorado within the coming months. This witness stated that Caitlin had been on her laptop, working on schoolwork, didn't move from the couch, and seemed distant and not her typically bubbly self. He left her townhouse around 10:45 p.m., leaving Caitlin and John alone. While this was the last time he had seen Caitlin, nothing particularly noteworthy stood out to him, apart from her being somewhat quiet. He didn't recall seeing any scratches on John at that time, though he admitted it was possible he hadn't been paying enough attention to notice. This witness willingly took a polygraph test, which indicated his responses were truthful. During the overnight hours between August 13th and 14th, a couple of teenagers who had snuck out of their homes told police they had seen two cars driving from the direction of Caitlin's house with their headlights turned off. However, they appeared to be the only witnesses who had observed anything unusual, and beyond this account, the police had very little evidence to work with. Before long, Caitlin's case gained national media attention. The disappearance had deeply affected the Fairfield community, where violent crime was uncommon. Vigils, rallies, television appeals, and volunteer searches continued at all hours of the day and night. Even a national mounted search group from Texas conducted dozens of searches exploring local parks, waterways, old train tracks, and areas in neighboring counties. Caitlin's family made numerous public pleas, appearing regularly in local media, as did her fiancé John. I keep believing that if she is somewhere in the worst-case scenario, that she fights her way out, he said during one appearance. I keep wanting to believe that because she's strong. I know she's strong. Some continued to view John with suspicion, but he maintained his innocence. When Fairfield police searched his residence, he gave his consent and stated he was doing whatever he could to help, despite feeling that the community was placing blame on him. I really did not want this to get this far. I really wish that she would have been home by now, John said in a media interview. I wish this could have been just a party for her being home instead of what it is. People are going to say what they're going to say. You can't stop them. He further emphasized, I'm not going to acknowledge the ridiculous things that people are saying because they don't know me. And I know me. I know that I would never hurt Caitlin ever in a million years. Meanwhile, Caitlin's father, Dave, continued working with authorities and organizing search efforts. As Caitlin's 22nd birthday arrived, the focus remained on finding her rather than dwelling on the sadness of the day. As the investigation continued, a friend of Caitlin's came forward with information suggesting that all might not have been well in the relationship. According to this friend, Caitlin had confided that she was feeling unhappy and trapped a sentiment she had held for approximately 6 months. She had expressed frustration with John's drug use and his viewing of pornography. Things had deteriorated to the point where she was no longer attracted to him or interested in physical intimacy, and she felt uncomfortable with certain activities John had asked her to engage in. The friend also mentioned that John could be jealous and possessive when Caitlin interacted with other men. As more people shared their observations, it became increasingly evident that Caitlin had reached a point where she wanted to end the relationship. John wasn't changing his behavior, and she found it difficult to justify his possessiveness and unkindness. Additionally, she felt uncomfortable with John's mother's involvement in their affairs, interpreting situations like the credit card co-signing as attempts to ensure they remained together despite her unhappiness. Some investigators wondered if Caitlin had felt so trapped that she had decided to leave on her own. Her family firmly rejected this possibility, stating that she would never have departed without informing someone or asking for assistance. They described Caitlin as a problem solver who shared everything with those close to her. The same friend also noted that just days after Caitlin was reported missing, John had referred to her in the past tense several times, which had seemed unusual at the time. In June 2012, the investigation briefly shifted focus to another individual. 26-year-old Gurpreet Kang, who had lived across from Caitlin, was accused of sexually assaulting a Miami University student. Police considered whether he might have been involved in Caitlin's case, but after a thorough examination of his whereabouts on the night in question, Fairfield police eliminated him as a suspect, returning the investigation to its previous state. Nearly 2 years after Caitlin's disappearance, on April 7, 2013, a significant development occurred. Human remains were discovered in a remote wooded area in Indiana, wrapped in black plastic construction sheeting. Through dental records, authorities confirmed that the remains belonged to Caitlin Markham. The location was approximately 30 miles from her home. A man named Andy Hicks had found the remains while searching for scrap metal. I was just digging through this little area here, picking up some metal, he later explained. And jawbone right on the other side of that little tree, right there, right between them two little trees. He described his subsequent call to the police. "I picked it up and I said, 'That's not no animal.' I hung it in a tree and went and called the cops." The medical examiner noted that Caitlin's skull had been found separately inside a tied plastic bag. There was minimal soft tissue decomposition fluid or staining inside the bag, indicating that her head had not decomposed within the bag, but had been placed inside after significant decomposition had already occurred. The bones had not been buried, but rather dumped with trash piled on top. Evidence of cutting wounds was found on her left wrist caused by sharp force trauma. The wound was described as a V-shaped incision that had removed a layer of bone made by some type of object. Beyond this, there was little physical evidence to determine exactly what had happened to her. Although the precise cause of death could not be established, investigators classified it as a homicide. Caitlin's phone was not found at the scene. Following the identification of her remains, Caitlin's funeral was held. Her artwork adorned the walls, and attendees wore bright colors, in keeping with her vibrant personality. Many people offered tributes, including John. "We would have had our kiss. We would have had our marriage," he said. "We would have had our honeymoon. We would have our kid, and we would have our life together." John's cousin mentioned that she considered herself fortunate to have known Caitlin as family. "Whenever I think of her, I just think of the smile and this artwork," she shared. "She was just a powerful human being. She meant well to everybody. Everybody was a friend." Dave expressed that while the discovery provided some closure, he felt deeply saddened for Caitlin's younger sister Allie, who had been just 15 when her sister vanished. "Some days I get so consumed with Caitlin. Her baby sister lost such an important role in her life," he reflected. The location where Caitlin had been found presented additional investigative challenges. Since her remains were discovered in a different state from where she had disappeared, coordination between multiple law enforcement agencies was necessary. Investigators did not believe she had been initially placed at the discovery site, adding another layer of complexity to the case. By early 2015, the case had progressed slowly for several years. The reward for information had increased to $75,000, but interest in the case was waning with the passage of time. 3 years, and the question still remains: who killed 22-year-old Caitlin Mark, reported one news outlet. Dave successfully persuaded the Butler County Sheriff's Office to re-examine the case, transferring the investigation from the Fairfield Police Department to provide fresh perspectives. Concerned that his daughter's murder might become a cold case, Dave sought a new approach to the investigation. He also contacted a private investigator named J. Ryan Green, who integrated himself into Caitlin and John's social circle, interviewing more than a dozen people. 5 individuals, excluding John Carter, agreed to take polygraph tests. Based on these interviews and tests, Green narrowed his investigation to 2 persons of interest. According to Green, one subject took a polygraph test and failed the polygraph in epic proportion per the polygraph examiner. A documentary titled "Taken Too Soon: The Caitlin Markham Story" was screened at a Springdale movie theater to generate new leads. Toward the end of 2016, police announced they had identified a person of interest, but lacked sufficient evidence to make an arrest or publicly name the individual. The private investigator shared this assessment regarding the same person. In 2023, 12 years after Caitlin went missing, the investigation gained momentum. Police announced the arrest of Jonathan Palmerton, who was charged with perjury. Private investigator Green commented, Whoever's investigating this now is on the right track. They've got momentum, and they have something that would allow a judge to sign off on a search warrant. Green explained that Caitlin John and Jonathan were part of the same friend group and knew each other well. Jonathan lived near Caitlin, and John was his best friend. When John had gone to Caitlin's house the morning she was reported missing, Jonathan was the first person he had called. Prior to Jonathan Palmerton's arrest, investigators had executed search warrants on two properties, one where Jonathan had lived in 2011 when Caitlin disappeared, and the other where John had resided with his mother at that time. Court records indicated that on April 21, 2022, Palmerton had allegedly lied under oath. He was indicted almost 6 months later in October, with the indictment remaining sealed until his arrest. Jonathan and John were also connected to Michael Strauss, an individual who had pleaded guilty to stalking and murdering another woman named Ellie Wyke, and was sentenced to 17 years to life. Police had considered Michael after he suggested that Ellie was not the first person he had killed. Despite some similarities between the cases, investigators eventually ruled out Michael Strauss as a suspect in Caitlin's death. Throughout this period, one person remained the focus of the investigation: John Carter. Since the discovery of Caitlin's remains, John had largely avoided media attention. Now 36 years old, he was married with children. Over the years, investigators had gathered substantial circumstantial evidence against him. The two vehicles that teenagers had reported seeing driving away from Caitlin's residence that night were determined to be John's car and an unidentified vehicle. Both his and Caitlin's phones had ceased activity around the same time on the night of August 13, 2011. Investigators discovered numerous text messages between John and Caitlin between 8:00 p.m. and 8:36 p.m. that had been deleted from John's phone, and some texts he claimed to have sent were never actually transmitted, including the good morning message he mentioned. John had voluntarily participated in 3 polygraph tests in September 2011, February 2014, and January 2021, all of which indicated deception. During his final polygraph, the examiner noted that he showed deceptive responses, specifically when asked whether he had disposed of Caitlin's body on Big Cedar Road. The search warrant executed at his mother's home resulted in the seizure of over a dozen items, including investigation notes, a folder containing Caitlin's school papers, an SD card, and poetry about death and killing. Some writings had John's name on them, with one reading, in part, "Deep down, I love her. You ought to kill her, but I love her. She must die. I can't kill her. Yes, you can. No, yes. How do you talk me into all these things? I'm just that good. But you're bad. I know. How do I kill you? You can't. You're right about what? Nothing." Investigators also found what appeared to be the same material in which Caitlin's body had been initially wrapped. The location where she was discovered was near a farm owned by the Carter family. Multiple witnesses had come forward to describe John's volatile and aggressive behavior, including a video of him shouting at his current wife while holding their child. When detectives presented some of the evidence to John, he showed minimal reaction, pointing out that it was all circumstantial, a choice of wording that investigators found notable. Despite years of denials and public pleas for his fiance's safe return, the evidence against him had accumulated. Although they recognized that their case relied on circumstantial rather than physical or DNA evidence, investigators felt confident in presenting it to the district attorney. In March 2023, the then 36-year-old John was arrested at his workplace and charged with 2 counts of murder. The first count alleged that he purposely caused Caitlin's death on or around August 13th or 14, 2011, while the second count claimed he caused her death on the same dates as the result of committing or attempting to commit a violent felony offense. John posted a $1 million bond, and as a condition of his release, was required to wear a GPS monitor. Jonathan Palmerton was also released pending trial. At his arraignment, John pleaded not guilty, and the trial was scheduled for June 2024. Jonathan's perjury charge was later dismissed. For the upcoming trial, the prosecution subpoenaed more than 50 people. After more than a decade of John denying any involvement in Caitlin's disappearance and death, he unexpectedly changed his plea. In court, his attorney stated, "Your Honor, he did." And Mr. Carter, if we may, on his behalf, John Carter stipulates that he committed the offense of involuntary manslaughter consistent with Ohio Revised Code 2903.04b, that is a felony in the third degree. Specifically, that on the date specified in the indictment, he did cause the death of Caitlin Markham by the commission of a misdemeanor in the city of Fairfield, Butler County, Ohio. Dave described hearing this admission as an out-of-body feeling. He explained that he had suspected John for a long time, and while it validated his instincts, it also angered him to think that John had lived for 12 years believing he had escaped accountability. "We knew all along who it was," Dave said. It was a particularly difficult realization that John had attended Caitlin's funeral, embraced and cried with Dave, participated in searches, all while knowing what had happened. When asked if he could at least explain how events had unfolded, John simply responded, "I cannot." One inmate later told detectives that John had revealed how he had killed Caitlin, though John never confirmed this account in court. According to the inmate, John had said, "They broke into an argument. He said before he knew it, he had her pinned down to the ground. He was on top of her choking, and then after he choked her, he said he was pinned again, and he said he didn't know what to do. He was going to call the cops. He didn't want to call the cops. He said he made it look like it was suicide justice. So he cut her wrist." The sentencing came as a shock to many following the case. The judge stated, "Court imposes the following sentence based upon the serious nature of this offense and the factors that have previously been indicated that anything short of the maximum sentence would demean the seriousness of the offender's conduct and its impact upon the victim, and therefore will impose a definite term of incarceration of 36 months. John Carter received a 3-year prison sentence, the maximum possible for involuntary manslaughter, a third-degree felony. This would be followed by 3 years of release control. A detective who worked on the case commented, "I've interviewed from homicides to rapes down to trespass 1,000 people, and I've never interviewed a psychopath. And that's what I said when John left. I said, that's the first psychopath I've ever interviewed." Investigators were unable to prove it, but police and prosecutors suspected a second person had assisted John in disposing of Caitlin's body and possibly dismembering her. Though Caitlin's family finally learned who was responsible for her death, they still do not know the complete story of what happened and likely never will. "That is why there's no closure," Dave explained. "I still do not know the whole story. And not that I would have believed him, because he's lied for 13 years. But he's offered no explanation. Hasn't even tried. And that's just to me, that just shows his character." When asked if he thought he would ever get an explanation, Dave replied, "No, I don't. And even if he writes a confession in prison, he's going to have to be more convincing than he's been the past 13 years. Despite the maximum sentence being imposed, many felt the outcome represented an insufficient measure of justice for Caitlin. 14 years after Caitlin was last seen, an event called Butterflies for Caitlin Markham was held at a park near her home. Trees were planted, and attendees wore items featuring butterflies. The gathering celebrated art and color elements that Caitlin had cherished. Dave expressed appreciation for the continued support, noting that it reminded him he wasn't alone in his grief. So bright and happy, exuberant, friendly, outgoing, and she liked butterflies. He reflected, and I don't know. There's been days that I've had bad days in the early on times, and the butterfly would come and fly around me like, oh, hi, baby. She was bright, vibrant, coming out of her shell, like a caterpillar becoming a butterfly. Dave shared that living with such a profound loss and uncertainty about what actually happened remained all-consuming. Not a day goes by that I do not think of Caitlin. I do not feel 3 years as justice, not for Caitlin, not for her sister, not for me, her friends, or the entire community that has ached and grieved alongside us, he said. I often wonder what she'd be doing with her art and her career. She would be an amazing woman. She had a talent, and she was going to go someplace. I'll see a picture of art sometimes, and I'll think that should be Caitlin's up there. In the quiet town of Fairfield, the memory of a creative young woman with paintbrushes in her hair continues to live on through the art she created and the lives she touched.